Hey, this is Ben from Dreamer, and I'm just chatting here with Patrick Scanlan from Studio HiHo. And Paddy and I have known each other for, I think, probably coming up to a year now, and we worked together on our Barclay Street project. Studio HiHo did the branding. So, how are you going, Paddy?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having
That's
us on.
good, no problem. Um, if you could just start by telling us a little bit about how you got started with Studio HiHo.
Yeah, Studio Hi Ho is myself and my business partner, Wes. Um, and we've always remained pretty small. So we fluctuated between, say, 3 to 4 people in total. At the moment, it's just three of us. It's me, Wes, and Tal, and we're all working from home. And so the studio started in 2011. So it'll be 10 years next year in March. And I guess Wes and I were both pretty young when we started, which I think gave us the opportunity. It's to think of doing it now with mortgages and responsibility. I think it'd be very daunting. But at the time, I was only had 2 years experience as a junior designer, so we didn't, we were very green. I don't know if you'd say ambitious, but maybe more naive. And I was still living at home, so there was no overheads, no real risk. So Wes and I were working together at a studio in St Kilda together. We'd met at uni. We were good mates at uni, and we always had plans. I think Wes is probably more ambitious than I was, and he at uni would always sort of say, "We'll get out and we'll do something straight away." And I had no intention of doing that. I went away for a year and then came back and floated a bit. So anyway, we ended up working as juniors together just to kind of test the waters. I guess we were also just mates working together. And an opportunity came up that came to Wes. It was a development in the city. And I
Is
think
this
Wes initially tried
like
to,
an architectural development?
yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily architectural. It was actually like it was a tower on Latrobe Street. So it was a
Okay.
big project. I can't really remember, but maybe it was 80 apartments, like
Wow.
sort of
Okay.
1 to 2 beds. Like it was kind of investor stock. And I think back then that was really what was driving the market. Like the CBD stuff was, going really hot. And so Wes just had this connection. It was a client he met at a previous job, and he got offered this project, and I can't even remember if we tried to bring it into the studio or not. But it was kind of like property development wasn't cool. Like it's just not.
Mm, mm,
People just weren't really interested.
mm.
Um, and we saw it as an opportunity and thought, why not? And jump ship and set up a little trestle table and did the brand in a week and pitched on it. We got an opportunity to pitch and we won the pitch. And then that project was really successful. It's kind of like kickstarted the studio. Like it got noticed by people. That's how we met Mike from Milieu. So he probably came through the door. I reckon he might have emailed like maybe a month after that project launched, and I'd sort of seen our name on something, on a brochure, maybe on the credits. And James Tutton from Near Metro got in touch off the back of that project. So within 6 months of launching, we'd sort of established these really good relationships, which are still, they're kind of still the base of the studio. We always had this idea that we wanted to make long-term relationships, and we didn't want to be shopping around and trying to meet new people. So, we've sort of found our niche, and we sort of do pick and choose a little bit with bringing new people into the fold.
How did you? It's not always easy to do something, like doing branding for property developments when it wasn't seen as, or before there was some of those really lovely bespoke property developments in Melbourne, and before Milieu was probably such a big name. How did it feel, or how did you feel going into an area that not many people were working in?
It just felt really, right. Like Wes and I, coming out of uni, kids wanted to work in fashion or, cool, do posters for bands, and I don't know, we sort of just always felt like we wanted to be more professional. And so I don't know whether we consciously saw this niche and this opening, but it kind of presented itself to us because we weren't, I don't know, we were open to it. You know, I feel like a lot of people just kind of turn their nose up and were like, that sort of stuff doesn't fit with the aesthetic of the studio. But yeah, I guess also right place, right time, because, you know, it was as that apartment, the tower stuff in the city was sort of tailing off a little bit, and it was relevant to us. Like we, you know, were kind of young people coming into professional life, and there was no hope of owning a home. Like that mentality had already set in for us. And so what these developers that we aligned ourselves with were trying to do was create great projects in incredible, you know, in good locations that we wanted to live. And it was projects that essentially were speaking to us, like we were really the market. So that gave us an insight and a real point of difference to a lot of the other studios that were established at the time. You know, they weren't really thinking like that. Like they weren't really coming from that kind of new market perspective. And so we really kind of rode the crest of that wave into owner occupier, you know, that shift away from investor stock to owner occupiers. And I can remember that being really radical at the time. Like we had clients who would come and they wanted to talk to owner occupiers, and real estate agents would just be like, you know, that it was a real shift in mentality, but it just felt really natural. And I think there was also just an interest in architecture. Like I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid, and sort of got steered away from that, I think, by a careers counsellor at school. And that never really disappeared, that interest and curiosity in architecture. So now we find ourselves in a, you know, with our own business, being able to work with incredible architects, like, you know, some of Melbourne's best architects, like we work with very closely on projects and almost on the fun stuff. And then we kind of get to step away, like, you know, for the 3 years while the project architects deliver on that vision. We get to work with them at the front end on the really exciting conceptual stuff and try and communicate that. So yeah, I think we're pretty privileged that we were able to kind of tap into that when we did and build the relationships that we have. So yeah, so we try and hold on to that.
So I think one of the things that I've liked a lot about your work is that it seems to be able to expose, or you seem to uncover like these values within projects that seem very authentic. Whereas I think perhaps that's not always the case in property development. So I wonder how do you go about finding that sort of that kernel within a project that's key to communicating the message of the project?
Yeah, I think it's about it kind of starts with respect for the project. Like you kind of got to, like, and it isn't true for every project. Like, and again, that's where this incredible network of clients that we've developed comes in, because they're doing good work. But when you've got a project that's had a really good architect working on it, you have to respect that they've thrown, you know what I mean, a lot of time and energy and consideration. So I actually think it's really kind of disrespectful to a project to just cookie cutter, you know, to kind of spin it. It used to be referred to as latte vision, you know, like it was kind of this, it was all about lifestyle, and people just would ignore the consideration of that the architect had overlaid onto the project. So it's already there. You've sort of just got to find it. And then it's, sorry, I'm just putting the cat down. And then it's just a process of talking about it, I think. Like you've really got to be curious and try and understand what the architect's vision was. And it always comes down to that. Like we can't actually, I remember we had this lecturer at uni that would talk about painting the dunny door. Like if you've got a bad product, you can't dress it up. But if you've got a good product, then your job is really just to tell it like it is. Like it's kind of as simple as that. But yeah, I just think through conversation, you've just got to sit down and talk with everyone involved, because they've all got the best interests of the project at heart. And they're all really, like, if it's a good project, they're wanting to tell you about it. So you just got to take all that in and then just let it sit. And
Do you ever have any trouble filtering through all the different things you get told about a project and finding that one sort of key or simple message? Is it hard to know which way to go? How do you what leads you to making that decision?
Yeah, that's sort of the next stage. Like once you've taken it all in, I think the trick is simplicity. Like that's almost when we started, we never wanted to have a style. Like there were a lot of studios with a graphic style, and we were very conscious about that at the start. So we didn't want a graphic style, and much to our displeasure, one sort of evolved, but it wasn't so much a graphic style as an approach, and the approach was about simplicity and reduction. So trying to work it down to its very most sort of simple essence. And I think that came about because you can't, these projects are too complex, and it doesn't land if you tell the story like that. And I think that's yeah, you kind of get caught in like features and benefits, you know, like if you listen to the estate agent, I mean, I hope no estate agents watch this because I'm not bagging them all
I've got a
out,
massive real estate agent following.
yeah, but often they want, you know, they kind of need everything out there in front, and so our job is to sort of set a hierarchy and get to the more emotional kind of core of the project. You know, people don't buy it because of particular tapware. You know what I mean? They buy it because of an idea, like that project needs to stand for something. And yeah. So is it hard? Yeah, it's kind of, that's the trick, I reckon. It's pretty hard. But it gets, I don't know, does it get easier? Does it? It's hard, case by case basis, I reckon. Some it just comes to you, and some you've really got to work
I
at
can
it.
imagine. It's the same for us as well. I think we find that, you know, some projects, I think it actually depends a lot on the client. And I think that the idea for the project always comes from the client. And if the client really knows how they want to live, at least for us, how they want to live, or work, you know, that makes it, you're already halfway there. And so extracting those key ideas aren't as tricky.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, I have forgotten what I was going to ask. My next question. Oh yeah. So another one of the things that I really like is how you guys seem to manage to reduce, and I think that word reduction is really good. And I wonder how do you feel about the word minimal? Does that have too many other connotations for you?
I think so.
Yeah.
Minimal doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
It's not about
cool.
being minimal. Like minimal seems like it's less, you know, whereas reduction's sort of boiling it down. You know what I mean? Like making a really good stock or something like that. That's not, they're sort of not the same thing. But you know, sometimes it's not boiled into a single idea. Like for some projects, there's still, you know, 6 different themes that we're communicating simultaneously. You've just got to kind of find a way to bring them together. So you don't, in that kind of reduction process, you don't want to lose anything that's important to the project. I think you still need to do it justice and communicate all the incredible things. You know what I mean? That are important in the project. But then that's where hierarchy comes in, I think. Like sort of establishing an idea at the top level is really important. And then everything else, like if the idea is right, it should drive the process.
Yeah.
It should feel kind of easy if you get that kind of idea at the top, right?
Yeah. Totally can identify with that feeling of once you've got, often we call that a feeling, the way that we work. If you get the feeling right, everything, and maybe the feeling comes with a particular story, but if you get those things right, it's so easy to make the rest of the decisions about which way the design should go. And we find that often if those decisions aren't easy to make, it's because we need to go back a step and like just refine a bit further what we're trying to do. One of the things I wanted to say was I really like how, well, working with you on Barclay Street, I loved when we got those brochures, just seeing that I suppose seeing the transition out of digital to print was such a big step because I could tell how much that decision of paper played into your other choices that you'd made previously, and knowing that this was a printed thing. And so I suppose I could see that you understood the parameters of what you were doing really well. And there's that, there's the paper, there's the placement of the font, or the placement of the text on the page, the image, and then the typeface choice. And there's not much more than that going on, really. And I suppose that sort of design aesthetic where you understand those parameters really, really well, and understand that just working with those things can deliver something that's a very, very rich message. I think it was good, and I honestly learned a lot from it.
Oh, it's really good. Like yeah, no, it's good to know that like it translated like that. I suppose what's the response?
Oh yeah, well, you don't have to respond.
Answer the question.
All right, well let's keep going. So let's talk about communication. I know that you're like quite interested in communication, and we were touching on this before we started. But would you say that clear communication is the most important part of what you do?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because obviously you sent me some, prelim questions, and one was about like it kind of felt like defining what we do. And there's like even as a kid in school, I was still very confused about graphic design. Like my dad was a journalist and sort of worked with graphic designers, and I never put that together. Like I never understood that. And then in high school, it was called visual communication and design. And then at uni, it was called something else. And so it's kind of like, it's one of those things that like the name of it changes. Like it used to be graphic artists, and like it always kind of changes. But there's this definition that's always stuck with me. It was Milton Glaser said that his role was to inform and delight. So I feel like they're the two pillars of it. I think you have to communicate, but you also kind of have to tickle something else. Like you kind of have to, and that's where the feeling of it comes through. So like that piece that you were talking about with Barclay Street, like the paper stock was so crucial to the way that whole thing came together. If we had printed that on, readily available paper, it wouldn't have been the same project. And so it made that pain of going to Japan and, sourcing that stock independently all kind of worth it in the end, I think. Yeah. So that delight element is really important as well in what we do. And it doesn't always have to be cute. Like I'm conscious our work sometimes comes across as being like, if you look at our Instagram page, it kind of feels cute sometimes. Where it shouldn't be that. It should like, but that element of delight should be there, and that should change its form depending on the client and the brief. But
so in architecture, I think there's a few different modes of communication that we use. And I think that's one of the things that makes architecture tricky is those modes of communication they're pretty different. And I suspect that graphic design has probably similar things going on, but for us at least, it's, communicating the design to the clients, and then communicating the design to the builders under quite different circumstances. And then the building itself communicates to the inhabitants. And I suppose the building communicates a particular feeling to the inhabitants, as well as performing, or as well as enabling them to use the building for whatever function it needs to be used for. I'm just wondering about what modes of communication might be present for branding and graphic design, and if you could talk a little about it.
Yeah, internally, I suppose it's sometimes interesting for us to go back to the concept stage. Like Wes and I being so young, we didn't really get schooled in anyone's process. We kind of made it up as we went. And we actually found that to get the client to buy in, we're not great salesmen. So we had to really visualize everything down to detail. So our concept presentations are actually very close to the finished product. Like the work that goes in at that concept stage, might be 3 weeks work. and what you kind of come out with when the client signed off is a blueprint. And then we spend the next 3 months trying to make it a reality. But if you take the finished book and put it back against the concept presentation, it's like it's pretty close, you know, in the way that it feels. But I think that like we have to visualize it to communicate the vision. But yeah, I suppose there's an element of it takes on another life when it's completely finished. Like I've read this quote in a book on John Pawson recently, and it was talking about architecture, and it starts as something very unmeasured, and then you have to put it into a form that's measured. But in the end, it should be unmeasurable again. Like it's kind of like, it sort of seems like what you were saying, you have to put it into a form that can be built, but then it kind of takes on another intangible quality that, yeah, and I don't know, that really comes down to the balance and having control of every element as well. Like brochures are kind of independent things, and we always thought of them as like this kind of tangible expression of the project. So when someone gets home and they open it and they put it on their coffee table, that it sort of feels like how the project should feel, and that there's that tactility. But that's only kind of one piece in the puzzle. Like if you think about the journey, like the user or purchaser journey on an apartment development project, you know, they come in, like they might see an ad on Facebook or Instagram now, and they might go into the display suite and there's the signage and how that all kind of sits, and then they take the brochure away. And so it is a really kind of it's a big process. So you've got to make sure that all those elements are singing together.
Do you and Wes have particular words or language that you use when you're talking about, you know, when you're in that concept phase and you're trying to get something, you're trying to get it right? Do you have any words that come up a lot? Like we use the word feeling, like how does it feel and how does the space feel? Use that a lot. And there's probably a bunch more if I was to think about them. You know, I suppose like cold in particular, or warm, or like, you know, words like that. I'm wondering how you guys talk about it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Kind of depends on the project as to how we kind of describe it. I think the feeling's really important. Like when you said that, I can imagine us saying that. It doesn't feel right. Because some of it's measured, you know, in those initial strategy conversations that you have, and it's kind of all down on paper. But at the end of the day, it is kind of about a feeling, which is like, you know, in the work that we do, the suburb itself has a feeling, and that needs to be considered. That's, I don't know, maybe that's worth talking about. You know, and I think it's why we might not be able to do work, you know, overseas in places that we haven't visited. I think you've got to know the city and the dynamics of that. Like why Brunswick is different to Fitzroy is different to Collingwood. Like, you know what I mean? Each of those sort of suburbs has a feeling. You've got to kind of like pick up on that as well.
How do you establish what that is?
I don't know. We just kind of get it. You just sort of get it, or you don't. Maybe.
Do you tend to spend time in those places, or is it just?
I think we're kind of lucky because we're from Melbourne, so like you just know, you know what I mean? Like you know how Brighton feels versus how South Yarra feels. Like they kind of like, yeah. There's a great quote about branding, and it's a brand isn't what you say it is; it's what they say it is. And so, like it's not like you sort of sit down and define it. It's like how other people perceive it, and I think places like that. You know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of what. Like I'd like to think that my understanding of Brunswick is the same as yours. You know what I mean? Like, or they're kind of on the same plane.
Is that how you deliver something that really resonates with people? If you have interpreted that feeling that's of a place, and it becomes something that other people have a similar feeling, or they can relate to it?
Well, I think it's got to feel authentic. Like whatever it is, it has to be authentic. And so if you can tap into that, you know, notion of shared notion of place, then I think that is, you're on your way then to feeling authentic. And I guess that takes time and takes conversations, because you sort of see some projects come out and they just feel like interlopers, you know, like it's like, that's not really right for that place. But that really starts with the developer and the architect as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're sort of a step in that chain.
So you and Wes, you started and you hadn't had heaps of experience.
Yeah.
And I can certainly relate to that, because I started Dreamer after not working for that long out in, in the workforce. Is there anything that you feel like you missed out on? And I suppose conversely to that, what do you think were the bonuses?
Yeah. It's kind of like, half, isn't it? Like it was kind of a good thing that we got to set our own process. But I don't know, maybe that held us back. I'm not sure, that we were sort of like fumbling around learning it for ourselves. Like you'll never really know. But the last project I ever worked on at the studio previously, like before we started out, it was a rebrand for an AFL club, and I don't know, the budget was big and they had room for just investigation. And I just got put on research for like a month solid. I remember I just had like folders and folders of kind of tangents of ideas, and then the presentation, I had to put it together in this, like, it was a huge presentation of all this research and where it had led to. And that was probably the thing I enjoyed most, like working previously to starting up our studio. And so I made sure that element would be really important in our process. So like just a simple thing of having an allocation for it in the budget. Like we've always got an allocation for, doesn't matter how big the project is. It's like, basically setting up a return brief. Like it's just a day solid for us just to read the brief and get into the client's space, look at all their competitors, understand who their target market is. And we kind of like reinterpret that and lay it out in our own way. But in doing that, we just kind of like get into that headspace. And I think the more time you can spend on that, the better. And so when we started, I guess we didn't have many clients, like we didn't have much work. So, we could spend ages on that stuff, and it showed. I think like there was like a level of the quality of our work kind of went up pretty quickly. And I really think it had a lot to do with that. It was just like understanding the brief, which previously, like you'd get an A4 sheet of paper slid across the table and they'd say, have something by Friday, and you'd kind of like panic and start graphic designing. And and now like that doesn't, like we don't start designing for at least a week on a project. It's like it's just discussion around who they are. And I don't know if it's like there's a lot of different silos, I think, that you kind of need to understand. But once you've got that picture set, then you can start thinking really laterally, and you can use it as a filter to really like, I had this other lecturer who always said, be quick, be rough, be many. So the idea is that you don't get stuck on something and try and craft it. And again, I think that's what happened to us in our, working under someone else. Is like you didn't want to present something that didn't graphically look right. So you'd spend ages like setting up the type, and you'd miss the point. Like you hadn't focused on the idea. You need to get to like that. And if you get the idea right, then everything else just designs itself almost. It's not irrelevant. It's a very important part of what we do, but it's not the starting point. Like a color isn't an idea, and a font isn't an idea either. Like I think there's studios that do still work that way, and that's completely the opposite to the way that I don't know, you might need to edit this out, but I wouldn't say that I'm, particularly interested in graphic design. Like I wouldn't say that's where my, like that's my hobby. Whereas there's some studios that are very much craft driven, like they're graphic designers. Whereas I think that there's so much more important stuff. Like, you know what I mean? And then the graphic design is a brilliant tool to like bring it all together. Like that's kind of the skill set that we have to like bring it together and lay it out in a book, but it doesn't sort of help you establish like that emotive element. Like you need to kind of have curiosity about all sorts of things.
Um, I've noticed that you seem to like to draw inspiration from like quite a, well, not necessarily broad, but certainly from outside of graphic design. Um, I understand that you typically don't use heaps of references of other graphic design projects. Yeah, do you want to talk us through how you might go about, yeah, I suppose like where you get your inspiration from, or what for a typical project, are you going out looking for things elsewhere, or is it what you've experienced recently that tends to make its way in?
Yeah. So that's a good point. Like we never look, it's not so much, yeah, we're not referencing other graphic design projects. We try not to. We try to reference other ideas. And in particular, we don't reference anything within the same sector. So if we're working on a property development, like we never look at other property developers and what they're doing, because I think that's like a fast track to, you know, becoming really homogenous. But yeah, where do you find those? I've actually found since lockdown, it's been really hard to that inspiration seems like it's vanished a little bit. And I don't know
Yeah.
what, like, I think, you know, I used to spend a lot of time at the gallery. Like that'd be the day. Like I just get on the tram and go to the NGV, wander around, go to a bookstore, flick through books. Like it just felt like a really organic way, and not like I was working, but it's just like refreshing. But since this lockdown and being stuck at home, I'm feeling a bit stifled, to be honest. Like I've trying to order books online, but it's not the same. Like I feel like there's something really special about being in a library or in a bookstore, being able to just pick random things out. You don't get that on Instagram. You don't get that on the internet. I know some people are good at the internet, but I'm not particularly good. I sort of always go back to the same sources. I find it really hard to kind of randomize my searching. So I sort of need to do it physically. And then there's just something maybe about being social. I don't know, like seeing people and talking and seeing what they're doing. That all feeds into it. Yeah.
I've found the best ideas that I've had that have really unlocked projects have nearly always came from other people.
Yeah.
It's always through, and it's often through chance conversations, I find.
Totally.
I find that all my work is better if I'm seeing more people and talking to more people and going out and doing things, as opposed to like, sort of really hard to do this, but you know, you work on a big project and you tend to want to lock yourself away and just like power through it. But sometimes it's actually faster if you're in that idea generation phase, at least in the concept phase, to actually do less of the work and be out experiencing things.
Yeah. I find that I do have to put myself into a kind of a bit of a pressure cooker though. Like I've got to start it sort of, if the idea is not coming, I've kind of got to work myself up on it. Like I've got to work really hard at it because that just makes you so hyper aware. So I think then you're kind of primed for when those conversations happen and someone says something, it's like, fuck, that's what I've been looking for. Like you can't become,
I think you have to go down the path a little bit. Like there's a bit of a design, it's sort of like design exploratory, or yeah, I suppose like an exploratory design process where you start the project, that getting a little bit into it helps you understand what the answer might look like.
yeah, you got to rule some things out.
Yeah.
And then you
yeah.
kind of like start to understand what you're looking for. But it's also kind of exciting. Like I still get that feeling like if you kind of crack it, like it's sort of an excitement that you don't get from anywhere else. And I still really enjoy that. Maybe that's kind of like, I don't know, a bit of an internal driver, like sort of chasing that feeling a little bit.
Me too.
Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
coming up with something.
I think there's a particular feeling for me, at least. It's like there's something about the excitement of visual things. When you see an idea unfolding visually, and usually that's on a screen for us, at least for me, the way I work. But it's a very particular kind of excitement.
And it's got to happen quite quickly. Like we, I know this is boring stuff, but looking at shifting over software into this kind of like new, some new tools. And maybe this is me getting old, but I was getting really frustrated with not being completely fluent and it being second nature and not being able to visualize something really quick. Because like when it comes to you, it's kind of like there's a flash, you got to kind of like throw it down. And I was like fumbling around with these tools. I was like, no, I don't reckon I can do it. I'm going to stick to the old stuff and maybe Christmas holidays, spend some time learning that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because we transitioned to like BIM software about 18 months ago, and I was just lamenting it last night because I think there's a lot of good things about it, but transitioning out of drawing in AutoCAD, and AutoCAD is, it's essentially just a piece of paper that you can draw on, and 3D modeling, which is also completely freeform modeling. And in BIM world, it's so highly controlled that it's just not the same level of fluency, and it's not, it's much, yeah, it doesn't feel as free. And so, I think, I suppose there's a time and a place for all the different tools.
I think that's what it's about. Because, some people talk about you should never move past paper. But I feel like, our generation, I think there's some software that sort of is that for us. Like, like I use stuff and we kind of sketch it out rough. Like we never set it up final. It's like, it's really sketching. It's not, it's the same as kind of drawing, you know what I mean? But like in a digital sense, but same, I think it's a similar thing. This software was setting rules and styling before you kind of could map pages out. And it's like, that's not really how we work. Like I've got to sort of throw it down and then you can move into that stage of, I know what I'm doing. I've set the plan up here or the sketch, and then I can kind of translate it into a finished product over here. But yeah, anyway. But yeah, software's a whack tangent to go down. It's like the most kind of like boring element of
look, I think
the whole process.
Honestly though, I think this is something I don't normally say this to people, but I actually find drawing on a computer much easier. Like I find I've always been way better at using software to create ideas or help, turn my ideas into something than like using pen and paper. I just find it so much easier. And I suppose it's probably a factor of generation, but I also find the pen and paper, find it intimidating because it's so often looks so bad, confrontingly bad at first. So
did you like drawing as a kid?
I loved drawing. Yeah, loved drawing. But I don't, something happened at university where I just became far more adept at using the digital tools.
Yeah. Because I used to love drawing as a kid. Like it was my, it's my thing, like I think when you're a kid as well, everyone's like, oh, show us your drawings. Like everyone kind of cares what you're doing when you're a kid. But I continued doing it probably up until about uni, and then it became work and I had to sort of put it to one side. I couldn't, like, it wasn't really a release anymore because it felt like work. Not to say that I actually draw much at all at work. Like we don't ever do stuff really. Like my notebooks are full of words. Like it's like writing is like almost far more important, not almost. Writing is far more important than drawing in the work that we do now. But it still has that connotation. I don't know. It's just got tainted at uni. I think at uni they were like, yeah, drawing was a really important part of the process. You kind of had to sketch stuff out on paper, and it just got charged. But yeah, writing I think is a wonderful tool. And I was never any good at writing at school. Like terrible speller, and had to learn how to deal with that when we started our own business. But I think that's something as well that like a lot of graphic designers lack. Like they sort of don't. They don't see it as an important part of what they do, but it's incredibly important. Like we end up kind of writing like we brief a lot of the writing that we use, but we also write like a fair amount of it ourselves as part of the brief, I guess. But you got to kind of rough it in again to communicate to the client that this is the intention of the work. So yeah, you kind of gotta get involved with it.
Yeah, I use it a lot as well, writing, particularly in the early phases, for sure. All right. Well, thanks, Paddy. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And look forward to working with you again soon.
Yeah, likewise.